Welcome. It is June 17th, 2020, 2 p.m. We are convening a Board of Health work session regarding water quality issues. And my name is Ty Menser, Chair of the Board of Health. I see Vice Chair Commissioner John Hutchings. Sometimes Commissioner Edwards is off the screen. Is he there?
No, but he'll be joining us here in a minute.
Very good. Commissioner Edwards will join us imminently. I see Kevin Hansen, hydrogeologist for the state or for the county. I see Director of Public Health Social Services Shelley Slaughter, County Manager Miro Chavez, Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell, Jane Mountjoy Venning from our Public Health Environmental Health Division. Art Starry, can't see him, but I know he's there. I heard him. He's our Division Director of Environmental Health at Public Health and Social Services. Lydia Hodgkinson, Clerk of the Board of Health. Steve Peterson, also one of our key staff members of Environmental Health, Public Health and Social Services. And then a phone number, which is the second Art Starry, is that right?
That's me.
Very good. I think I got everybody. There is somebody in the back of the boardroom.
Yes, I want to have her introduce herself.
I'm Renee Fields. I was just dropping off samples at the lab and thought I'd sit in.
Is now joining the conference.
Okay, very good. Okay, yes, Commissioner.
Because of someone joining the conference, I didn't hear who was in the back of the room.
Renee Fields.
Can you tell us your position?
I work for Jane and I do the water quality monitoring.
Oh, thank you, Renee. Thank you.
Other county staff are great. So for the public attendance via conference call, you dial 360-252-9020 and enter the PIN of 1234. Okay, I just got handed a packet. I think there's a couple of kind of sub-issues that we were intending to address, but I'm gonna leave that to maybe let Ramiro frame topic and pass it to the appropriate staffer. So
Thank you, Commissioners. This is a continuing conversation related to water quality in the county. And again, no decision is expected for the Board of Health today. It's just continued conversation. The three objectives of your presentation today is giving you an update on the surface water quality at the Deschutes River watershed, in particular related to the gauge that we have up in the park. Also, you would like to hear what is the lessons learned that we have acquired based on this sewage spill on Percival Creek. It was back-to-back spills, I believe, in a period of 6 months, if not less than that. And also, you would like to hear some of the water quality management policies they have and the county has in place related to the Scattered Creek aquifer, and particularly related to some of the thresholds that we have on nitrates. And I believe that was the three main objectives of this briefing. I know that probably as a result of today's briefing, there may be additional conversations, and again, no decision is expected of you today. With that, I will leave it up to, I believe Jane is going to take the lead in a PowerPoint, or Art is going to introduce with a little more detail.
Yeah, so Jane will be in charge of the slides, and I'll do some talking when they pop up.
Okay, Jane, you should be able to share your screen. There you go. We got it.
Oops, and apparently, is everything up now? I'm seeing a whole bunch of other screen stuff, Jane.
Yeah, you need to go to the PowerPoint presentation, Jane. There you go.
I don't know if you can expand that to maximize your screen or not. There we go. Yeah, so what we're doing is this is normally we try to do PowerPoint, but we've had some glitches, so we converted the slides to PDFs. So that's maybe why it's not going to look quite as splendid as it would. So what I'm going to do is introduce things, then I'm going to hand things off to Jane and Renee. I'm glad that Renee could make it because a lot of the work that you'll see here today is something that she's done along with what Kevin's done. And then Kevin has some information to provide, and then I will also kind of wrap up the last little bits of the presentation. So we've got a lot of folks, and this is a contribution of all of them. And I'm actually really happy to say that this is something where I hope not to actually talk about permits and fees. We're going to be talking about other water quality stuff today. So, so these, as Ramiro indicated, there's some water quality topics. Some of them were leftovers from previous briefing where we didn't get to the Deschutes information. There's some other questions that have come up, and we'll go from there. So Jane, next slide. So the topics, Ramiro talked about them or mentioned them quickly. We're going to go over water quality information we have in the Deschutes watershed and talk about both the river water quality and some key tributaries, and highlighting the information we've been able to gather from the Deschutes Falls monitoring site, which was added about a little bit over a year ago. I know there's been questions about how water quality changes, and so this will help put some perspective on that. Ramiro mentioned the sewer leaks at Percival Creek and the water quality policies, some historic stuff of how they were set up, and then some more recent examples of how that sort of information is used to guide decisions on how water utilities are managed, and also how water wellheads and water sources are protected. The next one, Jane. And I know that sometimes we're supposed to put the bottom line up front. I couldn't think of anything really clever other than just to say that this, I think, shows that the health department and our partners are involved in a whole lot of things. And so we're going to highlight a few of those today, you know, everything from gathering reliable information so that folks can understand the impacts of decisions or to guide policy decisions, to responding to another type of emergency that we get to deal with, sometimes more often than we would like. And then also, again, helping develop policy. And that was some stuff that was done years ago and is still, I think, appropriate today. So I'll turn things over now to Jane and Renee.
Can you hear me? All right. We'll talk a little bit about water quality in the Deschutes River and its tributaries. Here's a map, and the purple spots are our monitoring sites. We have, starting at the head, you know, the upstream Deschutes Falls. As Art said, we've been doing that a little over a year. Next on the main stem is Deschutes at Vale, but a little further upstream is Reichel Creek, which flows into the Deschutes. Then Deschutes at Waldrick, Spurgeon Creek flows in, and then Chambers Creek also flows in just above Tumwater, and then finally the Deschutes at Tumwater Falls. We sample from the bridge over Capitol Way. So those are the sites. The ones with the arrows are the tributaries as opposed to the main stem. We sample for nitrogen comes in many forms, and it degrades over time, and there's a lot of complexity to nitrogen. So we sample, as the water quality standards would like us to, for nitrite, nitrate, and nitrogen. So here we go, starting again upstream at the falls, moving down the Deschutes Falls downstream to just above Tumwater Falls. And here's our from February 2019 to March 2020, so about a year, a little over a year, statistics for the nitrogen. This purple dotted line is the reference, the reference level for Puget Sound lowlands. And we'd like to see the median value for all the samples for the year to be below that reference line. So the median in this bar graph are the little green dots that you see. The average, which is close but not the same, is the bar. And then the box plot shows from this line down, the line is the 25th percentile, the lowest sample, the 75th percentile within the box, and then the highest sample. So Deschutes, the median is is below the reference condition. Spurgeon, it's below, and the rest are all above. And you can see Reichel had some particularly high hits that skewed the whole thing here. And Chambers is quite high. This is looking, so how does this compare in the Deschutes to our other streams that we sample? The box on the left here is the streams that are meeting, that are below the reference condition. In other words, they're meeting the water quality guidance. And here we have Deschutes Falls and Spurgeon, and then there's other streams that we look at. Overall, the ones that are not meeting, again, many streams do not meet the nitrogen standard. So here we have Reichel, Deschutes at Vale, Deschutes at Waldrick, Deschutes at Tumwater. It's too tiny for me to see too. And Chambers Creek, sorry. We tried to make them bigger where we could, but we were limited. So again, you can see that we have a lot of streams with this issue, but luckily not Deschutes Falls. Another.
Jane,
Yeah, Commissioner Hutchings, go ahead.
where is Reichel? Where is that located?
Let's go back to the map. Reichel comes in kind of where we sample is off. It's off of Vale Loop.
Oh, Vale Loop. Okay, thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There's Vale and there's Vale Loop, and I get mixed up which is which.
All right, thank you.
Vale, whatever, but it's up there.
Wow.
So another nutrient that we sample for is phosphorus. Again, starting at the upper part of the river at Deschutes Falls, moving down to Tumwater Falls. In this case, the same thing. The reference condition is the purple dotted line. So Deschutes, the median falls below the line. Reichel had a very high hit that makes its chart look so funny. And then the other ones are kind of hovering right above the line. So they're not quite meeting phosphorus. And phosphorus is indeed an issue in many of our streams, as we'll see in a minute. There was a very high sample in January at Reichel that really, again, skewed the whole set. So again, looking across the county, we have 4 streams that were meeting the reference condition for total phosphorus, including Deschutes Falls. And then looking the ones that didn't meet it, again, most of our streams don't meet phosphorus reference condition. At the lower end are some of the Deschutes. So it is a problem, but not as big of a problem as it is in some other parts of the county.
Jane, I have a question on that. Is phosphorus something, I can't remember, I know I've studied this in the past, but I can't remember what causes the presence of phosphorus. Is that something that you would expect at a lower level in a water body, or does the presence of any of it mean that some kind of contaminant is in the water? Is there a natural reason to have phosphorus, I guess?
Yeah, it is an element, so it's out there. It is part of the soil, but that's what the reference condition is about. If it's not really an impacted stream, in general, it ought to be at or below the reference condition. So if there's more phosphorus there, it could be from a variety of reasons, including it could be extra sediment is getting into the river. It can be from fertilizers. It can be from waste. So there's a lot of things that can contribute phosphorus. Anything to add, Renee?
No, you got that.
Okay.
Can you define reference condition?
So there's water quality standards, which are a regulatory condition, and we'll get to those in as far as bacteria and some other parameters go. And then a reference condition is something that, in this case, Department of Ecology has determined is really what a healthy stream where the water should be, but it hasn't been made into a regulatory standard. So it's kind of the same meaning for practical purposes, except that it doesn't have the regulation attached to it.
It's not a maximum though. It's really kind of like you're happy if it's at the reference condition. It's not that it's the absolute kind of maximum tolerance of the, of,
Right. It would be, it would indicate that your stream is in good shape if it's meeting the reference condition. It's impacted if it's above the reference condition.
Jane, this is Art. So do you know, or you or Renee or Kevin know, on the TMDL, what is their goal? In other words, they say that phosphorus needs to be reduced by some percentage. Is that to get it back down to the reference condition?
My understanding, I'm not sure that phosphorus is listed, but I'd have to get my book out and look. But for instance, nitrogen, they want to reduce the loading of nitrogen because that impacts the dissolved oxygen. So in order to meet the TMDL standard, the water quality standard for dissolved oxygen, they need to reduce the nitrogen. Is that?
Yeah. Jane, could I jump in briefly?
Please do.
Okay, so the limiting factor in algae growth is usually phosphorus.
Yeah.
So if you want to stop algae, you want to stop phosphorus. And so when you look at Capitol Lake and you look at the things that are really loaded with algae, it's almost always the phosphorus that's too high. And so all the treatments that have gone on in the Tri-Lakes area were largely related to inhibiting the ability of phosphorus to get going and promote algae growth.
And like Jane, this is Art, and like Jane indicated, the nitrogen is a real key for growth in marine waters. And so that's why there's a big concern about that, because it can contribute then to anoxic or low oxygen conditions.
okay, great. Thank you, Jane. Go ahead.
Sure. So I've been talking about concentration, again, how much of the nutrient is in the water. And there's a different concept called loading that Kevin's going to describe a little bit more. That is also very important when we're talking about these TMDLs.
Sure. That's great, Jane. Thanks. I'm gonna do a quick screen share because I think I can pull this up at a larger scale. And come over here. Okay. So you see that is a little bit larger view of the same thing. So we're just about to go into, I think, a phase where we're really looking at this concept of total maximum daily loads more carefully. It's really a very powerful concept, and we wanted to represent the numbers we're seeing for concentration as loadings because it puts streams in context. All of a sudden, you can see what stream is more important than another stream. And I want to give you an example of what this concept of loading means. It's concentration times discharge, generally speaking. The example is here, if I have 0.7 milligrams per liter times 272 cubic feet per second, I'd end up with 180 tons per year of loading produced by that part of the stream. And I simplified the units conversion. This allows our streams to be compared. For example, if a stream is contaminated but small, it would have a low loading. An example would be Reichel Creek, which has some very serious contaminants coming out of it, but it's a tiny creek, so it doesn't really hit the Deschutes River too badly. Loading helps us understand TMDLs, and that's why we wanted to cast them this way. So let's see. This slide shows the Deschutes River as the broad purple line, and the numbers you see, and if you see my cursor rolling on these numbers, the numbers 21 at the far south, 32, 85, 104.
Hey,
These
Kevin,
are
hey, Kevin, you need to switch your slides.
Okay.
Click on this, there you go.
Okay, you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the purple line that you see with the numbers indicate the tons of nitrate. Now that's tons of nitrate produced annually by that flow of water times that concentration. So you look, for example, Lake Lawrence can have very, very significant, Commissioner Edwards, Lake Lawrence can have very significant nitrate concentrations, but the outfall from Lake Lawrence is quite small. So it's not a heavy hitter when it comes to the overall balance of the Deschutes River. But notice that we have a fairly thin line going through the forested parts of the Vale Tree Farm and down as far as Lake Lawrence. The line begins to broaden and the loading of nitrate increases substantially as we go down the valley. The contributions from Offutt and McIntosh Lake are quite small, but the main stem of the Deschutes is carrying the majority of the contaminants. As we reach this point here where Chambers Creek enters, we see a pretty substantial loading increase from Chambers Creek. And then all of that, 240 odd tons or 30 or 40 dump trucks of urea 45 fertilizer, if we dumped it in pure form, essentially end up in Capitol Lake. Now, a lot of that is deposited, is lost in the lake, and then the remainder flows out into Butt Inlet. So this begins to give some context about what streams are important, what parts of the input and loading are important. Now let's take a look at that same thing in a different way. If I superimpose agricultural lands from Department of Agriculture in Washington and the brown dots being septic systems, all of a sudden we see that the middle Deschutes has a significant accumulation of agricultural lands and septage feeding into surface runoff and groundwater seepage into the middle Deschutes. It's also where we see a substantial rise in loading. So that is, it's indicative of some of the causal agents, not all of them, but some of the causal agents we deal with. Now, I'm shifting here to phosphorus. Now, phosphorus, much of the loading of phosphorus is derived from sediment. It is one of the key limiters when it comes to algal growth. And we see that the forested upper basin contributes some, but that as we get into the lower parts of the basin, we have substantial accumulations of phosphorus loading the river, and that all of a sudden Chambers Creek is not a player in the loading of phosphorus. The lakes, Reichel Creek has significant phosphorus, but it's a small part of the total load because it's a small creek. So this, we hope, is the kind of context that'll prepare you for seeing much more about total maximum daily loads, the concept of loading, and what land uses and activities around the Deschutes River are contributing to things that might end up in the TMDL, which we might get regulated on. Okay, Jane, back to you.
Okay, sorry.
May I interrupt? I don't, Kevin. I don't see these maps in the handout.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner. They were a late edition. They were in the final version delivered, but they may not have gotten into the copies you received. I apologize for that.
That's fine. I just want to make sure I didn't miss it. That is very very intriguing. Very intriguing indeed. Thank you.
So I'm kind of a good time manager. I know we have an hour set. We have 3 topics, and we're at the 25-minute mark. If there are there questions for what Kevin's points right there that we need to hit now while he's on that topic? Not seeing any, so I'm going to go back to Jane to proceed forward.
And Kevin, you have to stop sharing yours. Okay.
Okay, back to you.
Over.
All right. Are you seeing it?
Yeah.
Okay. So another thing that we test for is bacteria, and this is a graphic to show the various forms bacteria comes in. So total coliforms includes all of these. Fecal coliform, which we have been testing for many, many years. But the water quality standard is changing to be E. coli, and that's because of this guy that I don't know how to say it, but I'll try, Klebsiella, feel free to correct me.
Klebsiella, Jane.
All right. Can look like fecal, but is not always from the intestines of warm-blooded animals the way that fecal and E. coli are. So E. coli turns out to be a better marker. So we have data in both. Okay, so here we go. Again, fecal coliform over the last, well, not quite the whole year, but from February through September. Is that right, Renee? Looking from Deschutes Falls down to the Tumwater Falls. There's two parts to the fecal coliform, or to the bacteria sample standard. One is that the geometric mean, shown here by the blue line, should not exceed 100 colony forming units per 100 milliliters. The second part is that 10% of the sample, so that's from the box up, should not exceed 200 colony forming units per 100. So all the Deschutes sites meet part 1, most of them except for Reichel meet part 2. When we shift to E. coli, again, because the water quality standards are changing, so we have data right now from the water year, so from October to March, which doesn't include the summer. A lot of times our bacteria levels rise in the summer because of that concentration and less water in the stream. Anyway, we're all within standards for both part 1 and part 2. Okay. Another thing to point out is that, again, this is looking at all of our streams, and the little red arrows are the Deschutes system. The temperature over time, over the last 11 years, is rising in most of the streams except Eden Creek. In some cases pretty substantially, but that's a concern, and we do have TMDLs because of this standard on some of our streams, and this is an issue across all the streams. And one of the reasons that higher temperatures is an issue, one is for fish habitat and when the fish are developing, and the other is because it changes how much dissolved oxygen will stay in the water, and that's also important for the fish and the critters. So similar to how our temperatures are rising, our dissolved oxygen is going down, which is the wrong direction. In this case, we want dissolved oxygen to be at higher levels. Questions? Okay. I'm gonna move on to Art and Percival Creek.
Real quick, Jane, before we move on, well, so, and again, I can't see the screens very well. If Commissioner Edwards has his hand up, just wave it. I'll try to catch you there. But I guess before we move on to Percival Creek, I guess, there's been a concern by the board about the forest fertilizers being in the upper Deschutes being a key or main driver of the nitrate loading. I think I have all this terminology correct. Is this data that you just presented, refute that, or is it still unclear in some regard? I mean, because we've obviously been spinning wheels and wrote a letter to the Capitol Lake group and et cetera. And I think that was kind of the point of trying to do this comparison from upper to lower. So if you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I will, and feel free to pop in, Kevin and Renee and Art. The data does not support that theory. The Deschutes Falls is in good shape. It's meeting the criteria. We're not seeing high levels. We go back to the nitrogen. We see a big jump in the median between Deschutes Falls and Vail, Deschutes at Vail. Another big jump between Vail and Waldrick. And then, again, we can see Chambers contributes quite a bit, or has high levels, but when you get down to Tumwater, we just see a small increase in concentration. So it doesn't appear that the nitrogen fertilizer that Weyerhaeuser is applying is impacting the upper watershed enough that are seeing it. Kevin, you have anything to add?
I totally agree. Commissioner Edwards, we had talked about this matter of fertilization in the Vale Tree Farm affecting the upper Deschutes. The first year of data don't support that. We went back and looked at historical data. We also see low concentrations when we calculated the loading, given the modest flow of the river up that high. It's just not producing enough nitrogen to account for the loading we're seeing downstream. So at this point, we're looking at other causes than forestry.
Yes. How often do you test when you're talking about testing the water up there?
Our ambient program, which is where this data is from, we test once a month, year in, year out.
Okay. I guess my question is, if there was any type of contaminant in the water in between the two times you test, it would wash away, or would it hang up there somewhere? Or I'm not looking at this from I'm not accusing anybody of doing any corporation or anything of doing anything wrong. I'm just wondering if they only apply at certain times, and that's in between the time you test, does it get washed away, or would it show up anyway as a residual amount of material, even though it's had plenty of time to flush out?
Right. So different contaminants are going to act differently in how long they stick around. The goal of the ambient program is to look at things over time. And so if it's something that shoots through fast and is gone, that may indeed be an issue at that moment, but may not be an issue overall for the ongoing health of the stream, if that makes sense.
Okay, and then
so we're seeing things all the time, which is how we get to the medians. And the median is always high. That's a greater concern from our perspective.
Just so you folks know, I don't know how much you know about the forest practice in general by all the corporate outfits, is they do application during the rainy season. So it's probably when the river is the highest. Also, did you compare your testing data against what DNR has on file about when the applications were made and the specific drainage area of the upper Deschutes when it was applied there? So, I mean, it wouldn't do any good to test for it if they weren't putting any product down in that particular drainage that month, for an example. So did you guys do any legwork as far as with DNR, because they can show you on a map where they make application and when?
Yeah, I did get a copy of the permit from DNR, and the way their permits operate is they have a 3-year permit, and they show where the sites are that they want to apply. They're using 4500 fertilizer, urea, and often coated urea, which is going to help. It's kind of like having slow release fertilizer in your grass or something. The coated slows it down. They don't have to specify which dates they're going to apply, and I'm sure that they apply based on weather and conditions, and they don't have to report specifically which days they apply. So what we have is the 3-year period of where they're applying. But again, the data is not showing that this is enough of a concern to necessarily pursue this in a whole lot more detail, and that we have more nitrogen and phosphorus issues further downstream, and where the inputs are coming in are below the forestry area.
Jane, would that have a tendency, the area that looks like it has maybe the less amount, looks to me like that's the fastest flowing area of the river. Then you get down a little farther, maybe by Lawrence Lake or somewhere down in that area, then the river slows down considerably, and then it's a little wider and a little slower flow, would that allow for contamination buildup because it wouldn't get washed out where it might get washed out if it was in faster running water?
Kevin,
No,
you want to reply to
no,
that?
Commissioner, I don't believe that
Okay.
would likely to be happening.
Okay. But no correlation between application, I mean, you know, it happened sometime in 3 years, but you don't know when. And so we did a test over a period of time that was a year. We don't even know if they did an application during that year. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hey, just a quick thing. Renee collected the samples on Reichel Creek. We did see a spike in Reichel Creek. The problem is that Reichel has agriculture, and it has pasture land, and it has beaver activity that all contribute. So, Renee, you were there, and you saw that spike pop up on Reichel. Is there anything? Do we conceive of that? Has there been a recent cut up in the Reichel Basin? Commissioner, she's right behind you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I saw it.
I don't know about like the forestry practices, what was being done. When looking at the data, I saw the January peak where it went up to like 0.4, which is pretty high for phosphorus. There is a cattle pasture immediately upstream, and like Kevin was saying, we have a lot of beaver activity there, so you have some impoundment. And it's pretty frequent that stream floods into that pasture. And it's also very muddy, and phosphorus tends to stick to sediment. So the combination of those two things of having a flooded area that has cattle in it, plus it getting a lot of sediment washed into it that's holding that phosphorus is probably why we saw that big peak in January.
Okay, I guess just for the sake of the time element that we're up against here, maybe Renee and I can talk, and she's right here after we get done with this. Is that okay?
I have a quick question. So follow up I guess what I'm trying to follow up on Commissioner Edwards' point about kind of the washout of like if we're testing every month, and if it were true that the forestry fertilizer application could be diluted or washed out, whatever that terminology would sound like, such that it would not be detected within those monthly samples, then it would seem to me it would be highly unlikely that they would be driving a sort of steady state long-term problem in Bud Inlet and Capitol Lake. You know, if it were that kind of dilutable or am I making any sense? I'm just trying to figure out if that makes sense to me, that there could be that reality.
Well, I mean, right now we're just not seeing the mass of nitrogen necessary to account for what we're seeing downstream coming off the forested lands. The high mass, the durable sources of contaminants are coming farther downstream, are starting farther downstream.
Yeah.
So when we look at this purple line, we see, look at the thickness of that purple line. That is a reflection of where we're getting the combination of concentration and flow rate together. And that's what creates loading. And that loading really ramps up when we start to get the more developed areas along the creek, along the river going south, right? Sorry, north.
Thanks, Jane. Why don't we move forward to Percival Creek?
Well, this is Art, and I would just, I'll let Kevin and Renee correct me, but if someone was applying excessive amounts of fertilizer, it would take a while for that to push its way through the system. So if someone was if there's a way over application, we would pick it up probably at our monthly sampling at some point, and it would show up in one of those graphs. So because it doesn't, coated urea doesn't get pushed through that quickly. So it would take, I think we would start to pick that up. Now, we've only been doing this for a year and a half, so like Commissioner Edwards said, it may be that we haven't caught one of the application periods, but if they did over apply substantially, I think we would see it in some of our data.
We would start to see it, yeah. Okay, Art, you're on for Percival Creek.
I just want to, before I do stuff, I do want to thank Kevin and Renee for putting together a lot of this stuff. Renee and the staff that Jane has, Sarah, Tamara, some other folks, they go out and get those samples during horrible conditions, and Renee's the one who put together those charts and stuff and actually understands what it all means. So I want to thank them.
Thank you.
And Kevin does too. But this, I wanted to give you a quick highlight of what's going on with Percival Creek and the sewage releases that you mentioned. The picture on the left is from February 8th, I think it is, when we had the big storm, and we ended up with a tree falling across the bridge. That bridge was put there actually to support the sewer pipe and the water pipe, but it ends up being an amenity for trails. The picture on the right, even though it's not very clear, shows the repair of the bridge and the installation of the new permanent pipe. And you can see down in the corner, that was May 13th. So next slide, Jane. So what happened, as you may recall, is on February 8th, the tree fell. And the good news was that the city of Olympia noticed it right away. As fate would have it, I was in the office working that morning. It was Saturday. I get this panicked phone call, and next thing we know, we're out creating new signs. We didn't have the exact sign to put up, so we made some with duct tape and put those up over Saturday. Our PIO folks and the folks who manage our website were able to push stuff out really quickly to let folks know that they should stay away from Capitol Lake and the lower Bud Inlet area. And so that was solved pretty quickly. Again, 30,000 gallons of sewage were released. Basically, that was a kind of an overnight thing. And the problem we thought was solved for a while. Then on the 11th, there was another small leak. Apparently, in the process of putting in this temporary line, which is basically a big rubber tube, to transport the sewage, there was a leak. So I don't know the details of it, but there was a release. We found out about it a little bit later. We didn't post things because it was a small quantity. And I should also state that on February 8th, after that 30,000 gallon release, the next business day, which was Monday the 10th, our staff went out. I think Renee might have been one of them, but Renee and Sarah and someone else from our office, I think Tamara, went out and grabbed samples to see whether or not the spill had adversely affected water quality. When we got the results back a couple of days later, the water quality was adequate for basically water recreation or public contact. So we were after a few days of having the signs up, we were able to take them down and then notify the public. Then on May 26th, that was the day after the Memorial Day holiday, we received a report that, again, the sewer line had spilled sewage. They didn't know the exact quantity at the time, but we immediately went and put signs up. That we got the notice, I think, late that afternoon, and staff went out immediately and put up the signs again. We found out later on that the spill started on the 23rd, and the calculation was that 230 gallons of wastewater were released. We took samples. Excuse me?
230,000 gallons.
230,000 gallons of sewage were released. So that's raw sewage directly into the creek. Our staff went out and sampled the next day, which was a Wednesday, I think it was. And we, oddly enough, there was someone fishing in the stream. We told them that wasn't a good idea. Surprisingly, when the sample results came back later that week, I think it was late Thursday, we found out that the water quality had recovered again to the point where for water recreation was appropriate. I should say, though, that Percival Creek, even though it was back to kind of normal, normal for Percival Creek isn't what we would like it to be. It is being impacted by different activities upstream. So after that, I did get in touch with the city, and they said they'd fast forwarded their process of putting in the permanent sewer line to cross Percival Creek, which is what was shown in that picture. And on May 29th, they completed the installation of an iron sewer line. So barring anything else, they should be in good shape on Percival Creek, and we shouldn't have any more spills. Prior to this, we hadn't actually, I can't recall having any incidents with that sewer line crossing. So there have been some other problems up on Percival Creek, up at the South Puget Sound campus, basically a human error thing where someone didn't properly abandon a sewer line that before they put a new one in service. So we think things are okay. As what happened before is on May 26th, we did work with our PIO folks and put information out and a news release and put stuff on our webpage. And then when things were resolved, we also used social media to let folks know that things have been taken care of. So That's kind of the short story of what happened. I don't know if you have particular questions or want more information on that.
Looking for, I have questions, but I'm going to turn to my teammates. Commissioner Hutchings.
Yeah, Art, I want to understand, you said that after the spill, whether it's the 230,000 gallon or the other spill, that just within a matter of a couple of days, Capitol Lake was okay and cleared for recreational use again?
Well, not so much Capitol Lake, but we sampled the mouth of Percival Creek where it goes into the lake, and then we sampled, actually, I should say Renee and company sampled by the Yacht Club, by the West Bay Park, and was there another location, do you recall, Renee?
I think those were the two main ones we did. Yeah, Percival
And those
Creek,
had all
yeah.
cleared up.
Yeah.
So we did not test Capitol Lake?
Capitol Lake's supposed to have any public contact, although I suppose, folks might let their dogs in there.
The lake is closed to recreation, and dogs are not supposed to go in there either because of the mud snails and other issues. So it's a lower risk because of that.
Okay, thank you, Jane, because I jumped to that Capitol Lake was okay for human contact. I thought we allowed that, or the city or state didn't allow it. But I just wanted, okay, thank you. You explained it.
Yeah, no, I was trying to refer to the water quality standard that we measure against, but yeah, it's still Capitol Lake's closed and probably will be for a long time.
What exactly happened on May 23rd? I mean, I see on February 8th, there's a massive tree that fell. That I can understand that, but my big concern was what happened on May 23rd that allowed that to break again.
So what I understand, and I don't have the exact details, is that the contractors were in the process of putting in the new ductile iron pipe. They still have the temporary system going in place, and somehow, I don't know if they'd actually started using the new iron pipe and someone, threw the valve the wrong way or what, but there was basically a human error where someone didn't close things off properly after construction or something, and they just had this big release. And of course, the bad news is it happened, on Friday night before a 3-day weekend.
Interesting enough,
basically just a big mistake.
The person who reported the spill was a homeless person encamped along the creek who noticed it first and reported it. So that was helpful that they did that.
How often, how many situations do we have of a sewer line crossing up in midair like that? Like, I'm not aware of, is that unusual, or is there a bunch of?
There's a lot of them. I mean, if you look, most of the big bridges, if you were to go underneath and look up, you'll see stuff hung underneath them, because that's the way to get across the water.
Mm-hmm. Questions? Any other questions? I'm looking. I don't see any. So who is under contract with who? Is this the city of Olympia that would take this up with, were they the contracting parties for this repair?
Yeah, so that would be the city of Olympia working with the contractor to figure out who's responsible. The real authority over the whole thing, as far as determining fault and determining whether there's a fine or something that's due, would be Department of Ecology. They actually have the permit authority over wastewater treatment plants and the wastewater utilities.
Okay, let's move to our final topic for today.
Okay. So this was one that I think it's come up a few times when we've talked about Scatter Creek and other things. What policies are in place to help assure that our drinking water supplies are adequately protected? So now we're shifting gears from surface water to drinking water and aquifers. And so, as you know, Thurston County, the vast majority of our water supplies come from wells and then aquifers. There's a couple of lakes, Summit Lake being one, where there's still some people pulling water out of that. But again, aquifers are the big protected or big thing that we need to be concerned about. And if you go back in history in the late 80s, and there was a study that was done by USGS, United States Geological Survey, and there was a groundwater management plan that was developed for northern Thurston County, and out of that came a policy, H296, that was developed to help provide tools for folks who operate water systems to basically start evaluating how to make decisions when water quality starts to be impaired. And the standard was developed, again, in 1996. It applies to the whole county, although not many people know about it. And it establishes nitrate as the indicator for groundwater, for monitoring and determining when actions are necessary. And I'll talk in a little bit about why nitrate is appropriate, and I'm sure that Kevin and others can fill in more details if needed. But what Resolution H296 did, and it's in your packet along with a source document that explains it, is it established early warning levels and contaminant action levels for nitrate in groundwater. And so this was done by the county. It's the county had established aquifer protection areas going way back, anyways, and so this was an attempt to have tools so that folks could decide, when they needed to take action to protect water supply. So, as I mentioned before, it establishes nitrate as the indicator. And back then, even though we know that actually natural nitrate levels are less than 2 milligrams per liter, as a policy, it said that anything below 2 milligrams per liter was considered background. So, if you had nitrate levels below that, you were in good shape. And then it said that there was something called an early warning level, so that when nitrate concentrations started to come up between 2 and 3.9 milligrams per liter, that basically the people who operate the water system should start looking to see what sort of problems are going on, to look at land use activities, to see if there's something that should be of concern to them. So it's, again, as the name implies, an early warning level. Then there's something called a critical action level for nitrate concentrations between 4 and 9 milligrams per liter. And it's saying, now if you're starting to get into this, you need to start getting serious, because as most of you know and noted here, the maximum contaminant level for nitrogen, and that's, again, a federal standard and a state standard, is 10 milligrams per liter. So if you start broaching into that, you're going to have to either abandon the water supply or provide treatment, because there is a public health concern about elevated nitrate levels. So those were the basic criteria that were in place. So again, from 2 to 4, start paying attention. From 4 to 9, you need to start planning to take action and looking to identify and eliminate the pollution sources or the contamination sources, because the problem is that treating nitrate's a pretty onerous and expensive task. And Kevin and others could talk about that if you wanted to. So that was a policy that was adopted in 1996 by the Board of Health. And so that's been in place. And I think when we were talking about the Rochester water quality a few months ago, Kevin referenced those things. And actually there was quite a discussion when the Scatter Creek Advisory Committee met about how to employ that and how does it all work and things. And so they came up with some recommendations that they used for how to interpret it and how to make decisions for their process. And if there's time, I'll go into that a little bit more. In addition, though, we'll go back one, Jane, there's a state law that talks about the need for increased monitoring and action if a public water supply exceeds 50% of the maximum contaminant level. And it's actually, that covers any of the primary or the primary standards, and those are the ones that have the biggest public health significance. In the case of nitrogen, that means that when you exceed the trigger level of 5 milligrams per liter, that you need to take action and do something to correct the problem. And so that's in place today. I think most of the water utilities all know about that. I don't think all of them necessarily know about the Board of Health resolution, to be honest. Next one, Jane.
Okay.
So again, why nitrate? There's a whole bunch of other things that are out there, but if you go back and you look at what you want to do when you pick an indicator, you want something that's reliable, that's easy to test for, hopefully something that's stable, something where if you're talking about public health impacts, that maybe there is a public health impact, and something that isn't naturally occurring in the water body that you're wanting to test. So that way you can say, okay, well, now if we find nitrate, we know it's something that's being impacted by human activity or agricultural practices. So that's why nitrate has been used for years and years. Again, when you see concentrations that are high, it's because people have done something up on the ground, on the surface of the ground. And there's a lot of history on using nitrate. And and it's called an indicator because nitrate, if other chemicals that behave the same as nitrogen, if you start finding elevated nitrogen levels and say you're in an area where there's lots of pesticides that are being applied, that should be a early warning to you, or warning to you that maybe you should start looking at pesticides too. Or if you know that there's other industrial practices there, you might want to test for the chemicals that are used in those industrial practices, because again, you're finding nitrogen. That means something that got put on the surface of the ground or was injected into the surface of the ground is now making its way into the aquifer. So you should start looking at these other things. And again, it's an inexpensive test. There are lots of labs that can do it. And so when you see that, then that can tell you then where to hone in your activities to find if you want to test for something else, because a lot of the other chemical things are really expensive and difficult. Did I say anything wrong, Kevin?
No, it sounds
Kevin.
great. There are a lot of other things that come out of wastewater systems and are dumped on the ground, but they're super expensive to analyze for. So nitrate's the indicator that allows us to do that cost effectively.
So, and I'll just go to the next slide, but Kevin led right into this, that right now things are evolving though. So as you know, there's the lot reclaimed water infiltration study. These are slides that I stole from some of their work. In the future, we might start looking at other things. We know that there are lots of different chemicals that are present in wastewater, and a lot of those are showing up in groundwater. So these little slides show that if you look at the one on the left, it shows the different locations where there's actually, where the water samples have picked up some of these chemicals of emerging concern or residual chemicals. And the one on the right shows some of the key findings of the initial work that's been done, that they've done testing of wastewater or reclaimed water for 127 different chemicals. They actually started out with about 1,000 and they narrowed it down to 127. 87 of them have been found in wastewater, 63 in reclaimed water. And as you know, as water is treated, it goes from wastewater is treated to one level, reclaimed water is highly treated wastewater. And 22 of those chemicals have been found in surface water and 16 are in groundwater. And some of those are ones of concern. I didn't want to spend tons of time on this. That, you know, we should actually have a briefing on the reclaimed water work at another time, but just wanted to let you know that this is an evolving science, and that, you know, when folks are saying, well, there's other stuff in our drinking water and it may be coming from sewage, well, here's some preliminary information that says, yeah, there are some things there. We don't know how, if at the concentrations they're present, they pose a big public health concern. That's work that's being done. But it does show that maybe in the future there's some things we'll be adding to our list of things we want to monitor or indicators. Next one. And I did, in the few minutes we've got left, I can go into one local example, and maybe we can talk about Scatter Creek later. But and I should have got this backwards. Next one. So as you may know, the city of Lacey is extending sewer service to the Capitol Golf Club Estates area, and that's out off of Yelm Highway, where Yelm Highway and College intersect, that southwest corner there. And so that's a golf course. It was developed in the 70s. A lot of homes were added in the 80s and 90s. If you look at some of the permits there, you'll find some that have my name on them. And what happened is that the city of Lacey started to realize that one of their big wells, the one approximately where that star is located, started to have elevated nitrogen concentrations. And you want to go to the next slide, Jane? And if you go back in time, back even before I worked here, the water quality was well below 1 milligram per liter nitrogen at 0.6. But over time, it's been increasing. And in 2006 or so, they realized, wow, things are really starting to get kind of crazy here. And I think they basically started to use the policy, the equivalent of the policy that we were talking about, where they said, let's start looking at what's going on here, what activities are there, what can we do to manage that? And that ultimately led to the decision that in order to protect that water source, which is very valuable to them, that well produces up to 750 gallons per minute, they decided that they needed to convert septic systems to sewers. And so they're extending sewer out there. They're making it, I think, free to connect. That doesn't mean that people will have free service, but they're making it really attractive to the community members to be able to connect. So can you go back one slide again, Jane? So anyways, they've indicated that they believe the primary source is inadequately treated wastewater, and all the homes in that golf course area which as it turns out is mostly in that pink and red zone, are all on septic systems, including some of the ones across the way on that kind of sideways U. Those are on septic systems. And so they've made the decision to start providing sewer service. They also noticed that when they took samples that they found artificial sweeteners, sucralose and aspartame. So to them, that was, again, further proof that this isn't something that's going on because of over application of fertilizer in the golf course or some agricultural activity, because they don't use artificial sweeteners in cow food or anything. Plus it's not on that area. They realized they needed to do something. And if you look at those zones, you can see that, again, that pink zone, or the purple areas where it takes 6 months for water to get from things that hit the surface of the ground to make it to that well based on their modeling. And the red zone is the 1 year time of travel. And then the yellow zone is the 5-year time of travel. So again, fertilizer or waste that's introduced to the ground within that zone, it could take about 5 years to get to the well. And the green zone is the 10-year time of travel. So that's a pretty common tool when you're doing groundwater or you're managing your wellhead protection areas, is to plot these areas out. And then you can look at land uses there and you can try to minimize the risk within those zones. And so that's kind of the process the city's going through. Ultimately why they're choosing to convert to sewer in that area. And I think that was this is something they largely did on their own. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll ask the Board of Health or something to support them, but the city chose to pursue this on their own. They have that authority to do that. And I think I know in the past there's been discussions about, well, do we have any recent examples of where on-site systems or septic systems have impacted a well? And so we've had some historic stuff, but here's something, happening right out there today. When I go home, depending on which route I take, sometimes I have to wait while the heavy equipment gets out of my way.
Art, the Board of Health resolution from '96 applies to, well, this is in the county. It looks like the well's in the UGA anyway, but even if it was in the city of Lacey, our Board of Health resolution would apply, correct?
It should apply everywhere, yes.
And so critical action level between 4 and 10, the next slide where you showed the graph, I think showed that, yeah, so they're in 4.97 would be still within this critical action level.
Right, and so I think if you look at this, the city did kind of what that process describes is, in here, it's like, okay, they were kind of paying attention, they were monitoring. And if you look at the data, and unfortunately, I can't show all the sampling dates on this axis. There's some where they shifted from annual sampling to quarterly sampling, and you can see that in this jagged line here. And so I think if you were to go look at the hard data, you'd see that right here, they started seeing things going on. So then to get a better handle on it, they started sampling more. And here I am moving this cursor, trying to show you stuff, and I realize I'm not controlling anything, but Jane is saving me. So that's what happened. So I think while they probably didn't have this policy in front of them, they were in essence doing what the policy says. They started to look at what the problem was, and then they started to take action to do something. And when you're talking about millions of dollars of expenditures and planning and all that, it takes a while to do it. And then again, last year they made the decision to do the conversion. They also have some water line stuff that they need to do, so they're able to kind of kill two birds with one trench.
I know we're out of time. I'm looking for questions from commissioners. Commissioner Hutchings.
Mine's very simple, Art. You referenced the WAC rule, 246, and it requires increased monitoring when water quality hits a certain level. Is that requirement at the DOE level or PHSS level, and is lot included? I know we're talking about groundwater, but they pump out groundwater they pump it out inland. Who's the requirement?
Standard from the State Department of Health, and it's for groundwater, so drinking water supplies. And what the actual standard comes from it's a federal standard, so it's the federal code. So that's the way that works. So it's a drinking water thing that's a federal requirement that's administered by the State Department of Health.
Thank you.
Mira, do we need to shut this down at this point? And
Yeah, you can probably have another.
you're muted. I'm not sure what everybody's time looks like here.
I believe you have a couple more minutes to wrap it up, if you like.
One comment I have is, and suggestion, I guess, is just that every time we've had a half a dozen water quality related briefings over the last year. It seems like we invariably, they're super interesting to, I think, the whole board. We invariably run out of time at the end, and we sort of never get to kind of what the board might do to move the needle forward when it comes to, I know we had a briefing last fall where it was there was explanation about different ways to manage renewable operational certificates. There was the pollution identification and control strategy that could be expanded potentially, or do nothing. I mean, there's always that option, but I don't feel like we've ever gotten sort of a range of options framed on this topic that we could sort of discuss if the board wants to move forward on. So I'd like to see that at a future, in the near future, for the board to kind of have that opportunity. Without any other topics, just talk about
Can you punch
your
the button so
strategies.
your lawyer have a question?
Yeah,
Commissioner Edwards has a question.
yeah, Commissioner Edwards.
Well, no, I didn't want to interrupt you, sir.
Oh, okay. I heard someone talking. Sorry, so I was just finishing the point. I just thought that it feels like we've danced around this over the last year, and we are always running out of time, and so I'd like to have a dedicated, maybe present a couple options to the board of, if we wanted to move forward on this, what would be the staff suggestions about ways to do that, and what would they look like in terms of what they would cost and how much manpower they would take to administer, and that way we can decide if we want to do that or not. But we've talked about, this capital city golf just being another example of, we know that there's effects, and we know we have this system. Commissioner Edwards has challenged or questioned, I shouldn't say challenged, he's questioned some of the scheme we have in terms of the early warning and the critical action level. So that was a good explanation today. Again, every time we have a briefing, I learned something new that I didn't know before. But it seems like then it's like a couple, 3-month delay before the next chunk of information. So at some point, I kind of want to put all this together just so that we know whether we're doing what we should do. That's just my suggestion for a next step. Anybody else comment on that or something else?
But are we
Commissioner Edwards.
Are we open for questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there any chance, because we didn't even get to the Scatter Creek aquifer, system now, we're running out of time. And is there any chance we could get a synopsis, like the Reader's Digest version in layman language about like each one of these? I mean, you did a good job explaining it, especially if I was a scientist, which I'm not, and that could help kind of in layman terms, just, yeah, looks like everything's okay here, but we need to do more here, or whatever it is that we're up against. Is there a way that we could do that and we end up with just a 1 or 2 sheet piece of paper for each one of these critical issues that we were talking about? We didn't get to the one, but I suppose we'll get to that one later over at Scatter Creek. Can we reschedule something so we can hear more about that? Okay, that's it. Good. I mean, it's all interesting stuff. There's just never enough time to digest what's coming out. That's all.
So,
Anyway.
Commissioners, you're right on point. There's never enough time because this is a very interesting topic. And there's many opportunities, I believe, in the last fall when we scheduled 3 hours, we ran out of time during a planning session.
I want to play Jane's game at some point.
So what I'm hearing is, how about if for the next briefing, we set aside 2 hours? And hopefully that will be at least a good chunk of money. And we're not gonna be waiting another 3 months. Maybe we can schedule this in the next month or month and a half. And there's gonna be 2 elements of that briefing, if I may, based on what I'm hearing, is to circle back on the Scatter Creek, just to finalize the conversation that we didn't get to it today. And maybe coming back with a little more of a synopsis, as I'm hearing, of some of the elements of the Scatter Creek, for instance. And maybe the latter part of the next briefing will be next steps. And what I call next steps and opportunities for the Board of Health to consider in terms of regulation. Is that what I've heard today?
Sure, that sounds good.
Sounds reasonable to me. Thank
Okay,
you.
do
I like that idea because as we get water information, it's like drip, drip, drip from a faucet. We're not addressing the leak.
Yeah, so did you get that, Art, Kevin?
Yeah, I've got that. So we want to kind of follow up on this, finish up the Scatter Creek thing, try to provide a synopsis of the different topics we've covered, and then start talking about next steps as far as, you know, what things do we envision might help move ahead as far as protecting water resources and public health. And that's probably a discussion that, you know, needs to involve our partners over at CPED and things. So I'll try to engage them. So talk to Jennifer and Kevin and others, because it's when you start talking about water resources, it's not just the health department.
Yeah, I want to second that. There's a lot of interest in CPED in extending this and really bringing in water quality.
Yep. So let's connect next week, Art, so we can frame the next briefing.
Okay, yep, we'll do that. So thank you very much. Again, I want to thank you know, Renee and Kevin for helping put all this stuff together along with Jane and I. So so thank them, or thank you, thank them, however you do that.
I very much do thank the whole staff. This is obviously a topic that I have great interest in, and I always appreciate the information that's brought forward. So with that, is there anything else we need to address before we adjourn? Hearing nothing, I will adjourn this Board of Health work session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks.
Renee, do you have a few minutes?
I do. Do you mind if I make a phone call real quick?
No,